for those of you online. My name is John Immel. My claim to fame here at Tank is I mess around with ideas. I talk about philosophy. I don't have any authority, so if you're worried about if you're, trying to figure out who I am, I'm no one from nowhere. I'm just a guy with a big mouth and the idea is to talk about it. I did write a book, Light in the Vineyard, exposing the roots, myths, and emotional torment of spiritual tyranny. If you have been involved in the neo-Calvinist movement, your church made the mad dash into Calvinism, and now you're like, oh my God, what do I do with the rest of my life? Read this book. It will give you the framework and the ideas. I use Sovereign Grace Ministries as my anecdote and how that actually played out. And then ultimately, the last few chapters will help you understand how to get yourself out of that torment that is the byproduct of that extraordinarily disastrous body of doctrine. It is Amazon, $23.99. I'm a capitalist. Make me rich. Thank you very much. Okay, so in this tank, I focused on. Oh, for heaven's sake, I am really tired. I didn't get done talking with Crichton last night until about 2 o'clock, so I'm not quite there yet. So we've been talking about where we sit in American history and the ideas that we're actually seeing confronted and played out on the streets of America, the political left. We have the political left and the total Marxist onslaught, and pretty much all the other speakers have touched on some facet of what's happening in America and what is Americanism. Then I said what I was going to do was lay the foundation for the moral defense of capitalism, and then the assault on reality as such and why that is important. The moral defense of capitalism and the moral defense of reality are in fact the defense of the United States. Please, if you're just catching me on the fourth session, you got to go back and catch all that background work. We're not going to relay it. I told you that the last section was going to be an action plan. This is definitely the thing that we are missing in American politics. The political right, forgive me, the political right hasn't figured out how to take action. And we're going to talk about that a lot today. Was that my sign that I was on? Oh yeah, it's on.
It is? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will confess that I had about 35, 40 pages of notes on an action plan that had to get distilled down into, well, not 40 pages, but we got a lot. So let's get started here now. Andy, please play the video. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to watch this video, and I want you to tell me what you see. You can bring the slide deck back up. So, what do you see?
One side being peaceful and the other side being violent.
Okay. What else? Hmm?
Oh, well, it's one trying to use intimidation for some reason, terror, while the other side is dialoguing.
The side that we are being told is dangerous and violent
Right.
is the one that is actually the most peaceful But while the one that we're being told is peaceful is the one that's being most violent.
Here's what I see. On the right side, I see people willing to take their ideas to their logical conclusion. I see people convinced of their moral superiority. I see people who fully understand that they are waging war. On the left side of this video, I see people who don't understand the fight they're in. I see people who are more interested in being nice than demanding liberty. I see people who don't understand that handshakes and guns do not go together. I see people who fail to understand why the political powers don't take them seriously. Now, I made this observation on Facebook. Actually, when that video came out, I saw it and watched it. And of course, 99% of the comments were about how the people in the streets were these punk-ass bitches that, just need to be spanked and sent back to their mommy's basement.
Right.
And most were determined to flex their muscles when I made this observation that they were really waging war. Most people were like, oh, they just don't know what war is, and they just, they're punks, and they just don't know what they're doing. And I kept pointing out, you're proving my point. You keep insisting that there is this well of aggression on the political right, the conservatives. When in fact, what we're really saying is the only people who are acting in aggression are the political left. We're seeing our cities, they're not riots, but these are the first skirmishes in an American Marxist revolution. They are probing our resolve, and at the moment we are showing ourselves willing to tolerate their tactics. Now, we give ourselves a lot of applause for, quote, peaceful protests. The problem is that the things that we were protesting got no one's attention in the capitals. The things being perpetrated in those capitals was tyranny. The lockdowns that we've experienced over the last few months, the COVID lockdowns, the house arrests that we've been having, that is not public safety, that is tyranny. And we decided that we were going to be more impressed with our handshaking than we were with making sure our political people understood this was not acceptable on any level. There is no clause in the Constitution that gives somebody sweeping political dictatorial power because of pandemic. It does not exist.
No, the only clause that there is for either
Insurrection.
insurrection or
Invasion.
immediate invasion. Yeah.
Correct. I've spent a lot of time laying the foundation that ideas are the driving force of human action. Integrated ideas is called philosophy. The more consistent the integration is, the more harmonious that integration. I don't care if it's irrational specifically in the big picture, but if it is a harmonious irrationality, that is what produces the most consistent results of action. And I've spent a lot of time discussing the progression of philosophy and its importance in human action. And the Marxists, what we are seeing demonstrated in our streets and in our cities, are obviously taking action in accord with their philosophical framework. And currently, those who want to defend liberty, those who put hashtags and foment on social media, insist they want to defend liberty in the United States, but they're not taking action. The sum total of their action is posting a harsh meme on Facebook, which tells me that those people do not have a galvanizing body of thought. So now we're going to talk about the ideas you must fight for. This is what you must do and what you must fight for in the bars, and in the grocery, and in the schools, and in the streets, and in the fields. Every place, everywhere, every time. We are far, far, far too timid in public. Get into a conversation with a liberal and they feel the moral right to filibuster as long as they want to talk. And they're indignant when you finally stand up and say, no, you don't get a monopoly on this time. I'm going to tell you I think you're wrong. It is far past time for them to believe that they're the only ones that have the right to speak in public. Let me back up just a scotch. In metaphysics, the existence is the plumb line that man measures his psychological health by his ruthless commitment to judge reality. Epistemology, man is competent to master his world, and individuals are the end in themselves. Ethics, man's birthright is individual liberty, and individual ambition is the rightful course of life. He owes no man anything but to give him the benefit of value until proved otherwise. In politics, the only legitimate government is the one who is given at the consent of the rational man and acts as his shield. Government is the servant of the individual to protect his life, liberty, and the enjoyment of his property. That is the only legitimate government. And you can do some fast math in your head and realize we in America no longer really have this. We have tolerated a government that imposes itself at will on our liberties for far, far, far too long.
Oh, yeah.
By frog-boiling degrees, we have been talked out of the fundamental premise of the American idea. And the American idea is government at the consent of the people. And the government's only role is defender and protector of the individual in his pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. This is what you must defend every place, everywhere, every time. These are the concepts just prior to the American Revolution that dominated the bars and the pubs. Every place people gathered, these were the ideas that they were talking about. Now, these ideas are not unique to me. They actually started with a man by the name of John Locke. His Second Treaty of Government is the foundation of our founding fathers and the Constitution of the United States. John Locke successfully identified the constituent part of all groups is the individual. The individual works to produce and then needs someone to protect him as he consumes what he has produced. This is the foundation of our government. And I guarantee you that the colonies, the people in the colonies, were absolutely familiar with John Locke's concepts. And they talked about it constantly. These were the ideas underlying our revolution. Concurrent with this, the previous things we must defend is we must master the defense of capitalism. Your life depends on it. I spent a lot of time in the second session talking about the moral defense of capitalism. There is no distinction between your life and what you produce and what you trade. There is no distinction. Which means anytime someone sets out to take what you have, they are taking pieces of your life. Nature gives man nothing for survival. Man's tool of survival is his mind. Reason is the method of discovering how to solve the problems of survival. Prosperity is the outcome of the individual's quest to live. To steal production is to steal life. Man leverages the productivity of others by offering his productivity in trade. Capitalism is the principle of trade in action. Capitalism is the free and willing exchange of value between all parties. Capitalism is the only moral societal structure discovered by free, rational men, because there is no force or fraud allowed. Now I'm going to talk to you about some mindsets that I need you to make some shifts in. It is my contention that because we are fuzzy on this foundational content, these foundational ideas, this integration that is so crucial, that we've gone soft and we do not have the correct mindset that I'm going to talk about right now. Mindset 1, politics is blood sport. I cannot emphasize this enough. Governance is force. It is about shedding blood. That is not romantic. That's not stately. That is the reality. That's why, George Washington said, government is fire. It consumes everything it touches. And we have to get it in our heads, every time somebody rails against Donald Trump for not being, quote, presidential, I want to scream.
Yeah, amen.
What you're talking about there is you think that there's some sophisticated statism that somehow sets a president apart. Nonsense. The presidency is about force. The Senate and the Congress is about force. It's about guns. And there is nothing the government does that it won't kill you to enforce. It is that stark.
But they can do it eloquently.
Yeah, I don't care how well they say it, they're still
Yeah.
going to kill you.
Right.
I mean, what is the qualitative difference between the thugs and looters that we see in the streets right now and the thugs and looters that are wearing ties in Congress? They're still taking our stuff. They're still stealing from us. Politics is blood sport.
Well, and I brought up in our private conversations about Social Security and the outrageous, absolutely outrageous bills by the Democrats in the early 60s concerning Social Security and what was done. I mean, it was outright, in your face, highway robbery.
Absolutely. You think that the Green New Deal, that will, if it got anywhere near put into action, it would crush your life momentarily.
But the only ones flying around in planes and driving in cars
what
are
are they?
the elitist class.
That's
the
correct.
ruling class.
Always.
Yeah. But
Stop
they're polite. But they're polite.
They're polite.
Yeah.
Stop
They're
pretending-
professional.
Stop pretending that the quest for political power is governed by Rodney King. Can't we just all get along? No, we can't. We're not here to find a middle ground between a little bit of tyranny and a little bit of freedom. This is a non-starter. There is zero tyranny and freedom. That's it. There's no such thing as a little bit of food and a little bit of poison. We can't get along. And we shouldn't get along.
It needs to be defeated.
It must be defeated. I told you, I'm not a nice guy. I told you in the first session, I'm not a nice guy. This is not my nice guy face. My bark and my bite are equally brutal. I am George Patton telling you cowards to get in the game. Fight! And if you don't understand that politics is blood sport, this is Chairman Mao. Every communist must grasp this truth. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Here is the larger context for what he said. With guns, we can create party organizations, can also create cadres, create schools, create culture, create mass movements. According to the Marxist theory of the state, the army is the chief component of state power. Whoever wants to seize and retain state power must have a strong army. We are advocates of the omnipotence of revolutionary war. That is good, not bad. It is Marxist. Experience in the class struggle in the area of imperialism teaches us that it is only the power of the gun that the working class and the laboring masses can defeat the armed bourgeois and the landlords. In this sense, we may say that only with guns can the whole world be transformed. Selected works of Mao Zedong, Volume 2, page 222 through 225. I'm telling you, this is what the people on the streets know. The organizers of BLM and Antifa know this.
But there's a built-in weakness to it because their premise is collectivism,
Correct.
which does not lead to an ability to convey strong force. Their guns aren't as good. Because the individual is stifled, okay, which goes along with science and everything else. So those who have the mindset of liberties have to passively stand out of the way and let this happen.
You're correct.
Okay.
And that's the problem. We are letting it happen. And I don't care how inferior they are.
Right.
Every time socialists have gotten in power, they have killed multiplied millions of people.
Right.
Every time. So you can talk to me about how inferior their ultimate philosophy, that the inferiority of their ultimate philosophy because of the weakness within. But the fact of the matter is, they take killing very seriously. The killing fields of Cambodia, 7 million people.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers for Adolf Hitler, most people think it's 7 because that's how many Jews he killed. But he actually killed closer to 14 million people.
Oh yeah.
Stalin killed...
20-some million.
Actually, I've heard numbers up or higher than 50, and that doesn't count the orchestrated famines. Every place, and we have no idea how many people North Korea is.
Well, the Great Leap Forward was 40 million.
Exactly
people.
right.
Right.
And they have been in the slaughtering business from the jump. So let's not pretend the government is anything but blood sport. And if you don't understand this, you will lose your life to them. Mindset 2, you will lose friends.
Yeah.
Right this minute, somebody's face jumped into your mind, and you're like, and that's exactly the person you're going to lose as a friend.
You'll lose family too.
Family.
You will lose family, and you've got to get all right with this. Here's the dirty little secret: these people were not your friends. They tolerated your existence in as much as they got something from you. But when political push becomes Marxist revolution, they will rat you out to BLM in a blink. Now, I will say that the ones who will catch you off guard are those folks who seemingly out of nowhere suddenly just vanish from your life. And you'll wonder what happened. Those will hurt. They very often will not explain why they unfriended you on Facebook and why they stopped taking your calls. They will obviously be social distancing, but not because of COVID. There's nothing to do about those people. They're just gone. And you're going to have to get okay with that. And in these instances, in the middle of that pain, the stakes are far too high to go squishy and to start apologizing and to start backtracking. You're either in the defense of liberty and freedom and in defense of the United States and what the United States represents, or you're getting out of the way and letting that slaughter come to your front door. If you want to cause change, you must stop trying to go along to get along. Mindset 3, remove nice from your life aspirations. Being nice has nothing to do with persuasion. And this is a big one. I get this often enough on Facebook. People usually about the time I popped off, like I said, my bark and my bite equally vicious. I pull no punches. Doesn't matter to me. And people are like, well, if you talk that way, John, you drive people away, people don't want to listen to you, they close their minds, they can't be persuaded. Well, my pushback to that is that persuasion has nothing to do with being nice. Usually when somebody is demanding that you be nice, what they're really saying is I reserve the right to morally reject what you're saying because I don't care the way you say it, the way you said it. Which means they have no interest in ideas. They have no intellectual integrity to begin with.
Right.
And you will chase your tail endlessly trying to be nice, in other words, to somehow say it the way that they'll accept it. And in the end, they still don't accept what you're saying. There are only two things that are required for persuasion. Intellectual integrity on the part of the person you're talking to, and better ideas. That's it. If they have no intellectual integrity, I don't care what you say, I don't care how you say it, they will not be persuaded. If you don't have better ideas and are not willing to advocate better ideas, they will not be persuaded.
This is especially nefarious within the realm of Christianity, especially when you are being admonished for not being Christ-like.
Yes.
You know, well, as Christians, we should be treating people the right way and so forth. And I say, have you ever read the New Testament? It's like, have you read about, I like the meme that says, when people say, what would Jesus do? Let's not forget that flipping over tables and beating people with cords is not outside the realm of possibilities.
Right.
Okay? If you read carefully what the Apostle Paul said in all the New Testament epistles, Paul didn't pull any punches. I mean, at one point he actually said that there were certain groups of people that need to be castrated.
Yeah. Actually, that was my next point was, and if you need a biblical reason to figure out how to get in the game and actually advance these truths, then consider Jesus. Jesus was ruthless in response to his detractors. Ruthless.
Whited sepulchres.
Huh?
He called them names. You whitened sepulchres. You full of dead men's bones. He called them out.
Vipers.
Exactly what they were.
Vipers.
Well, and Peter even said, Lord, do you not know that the Pharisees were offended? And Jesus was like, well, I mean, I forget exactly what he said, but he wasn't much moved. Okay? But this goes way, 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 way back in the church when I came out of seminary and was a pastor. And the whole name of the game was walking on eggshells and not offending people.
Right.
Okay? And Paul, if all of the church splits I lived through, well, we wouldn't be having these church meetings if such and such would have said it that way or said it this way. And way back then, I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I'm like, this is a bunch of stinking rot. Did they speak the truth or didn't they speak the truth?
I took this very anecdote out because I thought it was a little bit too much of a detour. Back in my Sovereign Grace Ministries days, when I was part of the denomination, and their big thing was they would denounce anybody who didn't. They had a very specific method and manner. They had a very specific way within their church that you had to talk. Now it was all facade, but in the end, if you didn't talk that way, somehow you were the one who was illegitimate. And I chased my tail, trying to check my tone, trying to figure out how to be obsequious. And the more I tried to do that, the less traction I got. And the moment I said, screw it, I don't care what you think of me. Here's my objection. And I started drilling them between the eyes. A, I started to actually get traction. B, I started actually moving the needle on people who actually disagreed with the pastors. And of course, that meant I had to go. But this whole preoccupation, this whole determination to somehow modify the way you speak the truth, to somehow to coddle somebody's delicate sensibilities, that's madness. The truth, by definition, divides. The truth says one thing is right and one thing is wrong. And if you can't be bold in that declaration, you're useless. You're incompetent.
See,
I was called because I did similar things. Susan, you have a rebellious spirit.
You've got
Damn right I have a
strong
rebellious spirit.
personality. And see, you're just touching all kinds of nerves because way back when I'm in my early 30s, I couldn't stand the doctor. It was Dr. Dobson, was that his name? Because it became very apparent to me that one of the prerequisites for being on his show is that you talk softly, you know, and you talked in a godly manner, you know. And I'm like, I used to just be like, you know, I was an alarm technician at the time and just wanted to grab a tool and start pounding the radio in the truck. You know, it just drove me nuts. So you're hitting all kinds of nerves with me.
Be bold in demanding people judge reality correctly. Refuse to participate in the societal slide into psychosis. We do not have the moral obligation to accept anything that is against reality as normal. Mindset 4, prepare to lose your job. There is an enormous pressure on businesses to cave to the current political climate. I will say that the founding fathers were extraordinarily concerned about a political orthodoxy. Now, in their minds, that was going to come from the church. That the reason they advocated the concept of the separation of church and state is because they didn't want participation in the state to have ideological requirements beyond the foundation. Well, in the age of political correctness, and we really do have an orthodoxy prescribed, which means businesses are terrified. And because businesses are far, far, far too beholden to government, because the government passes out licenses and permissions to do business, they're now terrified that if they're not paying homage to the orthodoxy of the day, that their business will go under. Now, these businesses are committing capitalist suicide by doing this, taking these actions. And many of them are going to cave them in the moment of expediency and fire you. But here's the reality. If we fail to defend liberty now, you will certainly lose your job when the Marxists take over. In the rise of National Socialism through the 1920s, 30s, well, through the 1930s, Germany had just had a massive blast of the Industrial Revolution. And it was actually growing economically and vibrantly. And a lot of those industrialists sided with the National Socialist policies, not Hitler specifically, but the National Socialist platform. By the time they figured out that they had granted all this power to the National Socialist Party, their businesses were gone. So they crawled in bed in the name of doing business with the government and at their behest. And then figured out, well, too late, that they lost it all. They gave it all away. I fully expect that that is exactly what's on the horizon for these businesses. If they fail to grasp that giving money, giving power to people who will ultimately cut your throat after you've given them that power, they're the ones committing suicide. And it is crucial that the American people stop working to support it.
So what I'm thinking of is some of these big corporations, like whether it's Microsoft or Google or Amazon or whoever, who are funding these lobbyist organizations that are funding political leftists.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Now, in the question in regard to your mindset number 4 here, prepare to lose your job, what would that look like with regards to, say, someone like maybe a server in a restaurant, or maybe somebody working in retail, or maybe somebody working in an office desk? What are you getting at here when you're saying prepared? Are you talking about just somebody who is, how would somebody lose their job?
They walk, they actually post.
By just speaking about, okay.
Simple answer. Somebody who's a server right this minute watching this video says, hey, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. I want to make sure all my friends know about it. She takes it, he takes it, they put it on their feed. The business they work for catches wind of what's on their feed. They see me, they see, oh my God, that guy's crazy. They go, hey, we're going to fire her or him because they posted this.
Okay.
That's how that would look.
Okay.
Because it hurts the whole business.
So
Because in their mind, somehow this they want to distance themselves from. It doesn't matter that ultimately I'm advocating for the foundations that keep that business alive and well and healthy and prosperous. In their minds, what I'm saying, the business's mind, what I'm saying is somehow, well, it goes against our current orthodoxy, and it doesn't support BLM, whatever.
So it's not just somebody on the job using their job as a platform to promote ideas. You're talking about specifically the mere association or affiliation with those ideas.
Okay,
How they
yes.
And reflecting poorly against that establishment.
And let me, actually, you've keyed something in my head that I want to talk about, not in my notes. I do think this is an important, crucial distinction. When you're working for someone, they own your time.
Yeah.
They own your time. So, for instance, since the NFL is front and center in this whole woke business, I think it is actually wrong that the people who work for the business have decided to turn it into an activist platform. That's not your job. Your job is to play football.
Yeah.
Right.
Your job is to play basketball.
Right.
The people who watch you do these things don't care about your politics.
Right.
We care that you do these sports. Now, if you want to, independent of that forum, independent of NFL Sunday,
Right.
and you want to go out and you want to stand in the streets and beat drums and shout BLM, more power to you. So if you're that server and you decide that while you're at work, you want to proselytize, for whatever reason, more power to you, but that, I think, is reasonable for the business to say, that's not what we're about here.
Yeah.
By contrast, that is not at all the same thing as you, on your own time and on your own dime, advocating political positions that are advantageous to liberty and freedom. And then you get fired, that's the injustice. And that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So what's going on here when you know great A well if all these NFL owners would just say, look, it's not the venue. Not everybody that comes and pays to see a game is of your own political mindset, that is perfectly reasonable and shuts it all down. Is what's going on here is, and the players aren't going to walk away with the money. So what's going on? To me, it completely doesn't make sense that all of these NFL owners are capitulating to all this nonsense.
Well, I mean, I have an opinion on the subject, of course. I think a good number of those NFL owners, or these sports team owners, are scared. And the other part is they lean left.
Right.
Their political views are complicit. And so the ones that are scared are incompetent. And the ones who are part of the movement are complicit. And so they don't have the balls to say, you know what, if that's what you're going to do, you don't work here.
Right.
And when we're talking about an organization, and we really don't know what the actual value of the NFL is, but it's multiplied millions of dollars, billions with a B. It might even be close to trillions at this rate, we don't know. Because they won't release those numbers.
Right.
And I'm guessing there is enough business downside for the players walking out that they are nervous about that. And so, and I'm 1,000% sure that Roger Goodell is a political leftist.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and it's going to happen, but here's the thing, it's going to happen they're going to lose money one way or the other because, number one, they're alienating their fan base. Fans are turning off in droves. The NBA playoffs are down 40%. Ratings are down 40% from last year. So
Andy, don't ask me to explain that because I can't.
That's going to affect their bottom line somehow.
Somehow or another, they've got it in their heads that there's resources and revenue from other places.
Right.
I mean, LeBron James gets paid an enormous amount of money from China. So I don't know. I don't know how they're rationalizing that madness in their head. But I am of the opinion that all of the government subsidies that these teams have been given to go build their stadiums in various cities should be immediately revoked.
Oh, yeah.
The sweetheart deals, the crony socialism that has been put in place to make it possible for these team owners to have this kind of profitability, I think that should be immediately revoked.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, if these stadiums are sitting empty, I mean, what good's an empty stadium? I mean,
Well, what good's an empty stadium? But right now they don't pay tax. Many of them don't pay taxes on them because they get these tax dispensations to build these massive stadiums. And it sounds good, and I know why a lot of politicians think this is a great idea. But in the end, it actually, if you're really in the business of taxation, it sucks up an enormous amount of tax revenue into the state. It pulls it right out. Well, these teams now are openly hostile to the American concept. They should not be getting, I don't think they should have had it from the beginning. But now, the notion that these teams get to somehow continue to have these deals in light of how they're acting, no.
Yeah.
So this next one, I fully expect to be one of the most controversial things that I say. So here we go, I'm going to dive in. Violence. There is only two ways for man to deal with other men: reason or violence. When reason is abolished, the only available choice is violence. Of all the mindset shifts I expect, this one will give people the most trouble. So I'm going to spend some time on it. Our moral expectation in the United States is illustrated every time someone snarls the word vigilante about someone who defends their life and their property,
Or somebody else's.
or somebody else's life and their property. We hold someone who is a vigilante in contempt. Even though, historically, vigilante was really someone who was vigilant in the defense of his city. It didn't mean someone who was without law or lawless or being judge, jury, and executioner. It only meant someone who was deliberate about defending the lives that they have. Our moral expectation of violence is played out in every action movie ever made. The bad guys can go on a rampage, and the good guy is confronted with any number of times that they could have shot him in the head and ended it. But no, the good guy has got to be brutalized and beat and brutalized and beat until he's a half an inch from dead. And then and only then can he actually retaliate.
Well, except for Bonnie and Clyde.
Well, but that's when men really understood what violence was about.
Yeah.
Bonnie and Clyde, once they declared themselves outlaws and murderous outlaws, they were like, screw that.
I mean, there was no negotiating with Bonnie and Clyde. I mean, they were put down without prejudice.
Absolutely. Our moral understanding is basically this: all violence is immoral and therefore forbidden. This means that a mother who kills to defend her children is the same as killing someone who commits robbery. The state executing the rapist is just as immoral as the father who raped and killed his daughter. Now, I challenge this moral premise because it is the height of moral equivalency. And this moral equivalency delivers the world into the hands of savages. This mindset stems from, among many other things, the Christian edicts to turn the other cheek,
Right.
and thou shalt not murder. But it is my pot-stirring assertion that Christians romanticize the nonviolent innate Christianity way too much. As if the world will be transformed by Care Bears, hugs, and rainbows. But I can't but notice that even God uses violence as the final arbitration of human existence. Whatever your soteriology, whatever your theory of salvation, God is just as committed to violence as anyone. By definition, the threat of hell is the threat of violence. Even if you don't think hell is an actual place, and people don't really burn for eternity. If you opt for the seemingly more benign, being cast into outer darkness, the sinner is still being thrown. That would be violence. This is still force. It is still violence. And also notice this. I know you guys online that typically watch, you're like, hey, he's going to read a Bible verse, he's going to burn. But no, here we go. Ready? Revelations 19:11. This is the Berean literal Bible. Verse 11. And I saw heaven being opened, and behold, a white horse, and the one sitting on him called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. Out of his mouth goes forth a sharp sword, and that with it he may strike down the nations. He will shepherd them with a rod of iron, and he treads the press of wine of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. Now, for you pacifists among us, listen to this. And I saw one angel standing in the sun, and he cried out in a loud voice, saying to all of the birds, fly in mid-heaven. Come gather yourselves unto the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, eat the flesh of commanders, eat the flesh of captains, eat the flesh of horses, and those sitting on them, and the flesh of all, both free and slave, small and great. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies having been gathered together to make war with the one sitting on the horse and his army. And the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, and the one having done the signs before him, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those worshiping his image. The two were cast into the lake of fire burning with brimstone, and the rest were killed with the sword of the one sitting on the horse, having gone forth out of his mouth. And the birds were filled with their flesh. That is a brutal, brutal scene.
Birds, in that sense, they translated that a little bit too benign, I think. That's actually the birds of carrion, fowl of carrion. I think the word there is fowls, but that traditionally meant carrion birds, like vultures, the scavengers.
But notice,
Yeah.
Jesus' return is not marked by a prevailing rational argument that causes men to rethink their course of life. It is marked by the culmination of a global war, a war of total annihilation, carried out by a superweapon that comes out of his mouth, and a bunch of birds that eat everybody and everything until they're dead. And the global government is a dictatorship. I know that Christians like these types of triumphant verses because we think ourselves the benefactor of said dictatorship, but a dictatorship is still a dictatorship. And if it was born in blood, what is the likelihood it's sustained in blood? I know, pot stirring, I get it. But I renew my assertion, violence is the determining factor of human events. The root moral question is, what does the violence serve? Is the violence done in service to tyranny? Or is the violence done in service to liberty? This is the only moral criteria by which violence can be committed. If the initiators of violence are wrong. But when I say the initiators of violence, I don't mean that you're half an inch from dying and only then can you fight back. The people who decide to go block traffic with their bodies are initiating force. We do not have to stand around idly by while people end our free movement and our free association. But once that force is initiated, they have delivered themselves over to irrationality. They are the ones who are now on the hook, and they must be met with a superior form of violence.
And then going back to your statement about John Locke, he called that a state of war.
A state of war, that is correct. And it is crucial. The moment a man declares a state of war with another man, he has forfeited his right to treatment within civil society. Refusing to fight against tyranny is to forever to deliver the world over to tyrants. To refuse fighting despotism is to banish justice from the earth. We cannot negotiate with brutality. We do not give the savage the benefit of the doubt. These savages, these brutes, these despots on the streets have exempted themselves from negotiation. In a civil society, a society based on free people with free trade, the moral absolute must be, when one side initiates the use of force or fraud, that side is wrong and must be met with superior force to end the violence. Then use the force to extract 100% restitution. To have a civil society requires the use of force. The civilized must fight against the savage and the brute. One of the most fundamental rights of human existence is the right to self-defense. We do not have the moral obligation to sit idly by while brutes and savages rape and pillage and plunder our lives.
So if I could play devil's advocate for just a moment. These ones that you see being riotous and blocking traffic and doing things like that, their contention would be that the reason they're behaving this way is because this is the only way anyone will listen. In other words, they're trying to get us to, they're trying to convince us that, well, we've tried the route of reason and complaining and trying to do this in a civil manner, and it's gotten us nowhere. So now we have to do this. So how is that different from what you're suggesting?
I'm not even sure I see the intellectual equation there.
Well, okay.
The
Well,
fact,
then I guess what then would be your response to that?
well, my response falls along a couple lines here off the top of my head.
I guess let me restate it then. We have two courses of action: reason or violence. When reason is abolished, the only recourse left is violence, and violence is therefore inevitable. So, playing devil's advocate here, let's just say the people all these people that are protesting protesting air quotes and rioting, let's call it what it is, in Portland, Seattle, wherever, every city, wherever it might be in this United States. Their contention is that this is the only reason that this is the only way that they can get attention to their cause. Okay, because they have tried the peaceful route. They've tried to reason and to make their arguments heard and to make their complaints heard, and nobody's listening. So in their minds, because reason was no longer working, now they're resorting to violence. And so therefore that somehow justifies it.
That's all pretense. What they're really saying, as long as you keep Trump in office, we're going to commit violence. And therefore, as long as you have Trump, you have violence. Therefore, the only way to alleviate the violence is to get rid of Trump.
Okay, but
So this is pure tyranny.
if it's a pretense, okay, I accept what you're saying, that it is a pretense, that there is
Right.
another agenda. Okay,
Right.
If that's the answer to my question, playing devil's advocate. But then the goal is, our response is, we need to reveal that pretense.
And I think some people
you know what
are.
I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like,
I guess the moment someone initiates violence, we're no longer negotiating. I don't really care what you thought. If they initiate violence, then all bets are off in the rational discussion. So I don't need to justify my retaliation in that context.
so the difference then would be is they're not responding to violence; they're using violence as a tool.
Trump in office equals violence. Get rid of Trump, you get rid of the violence. But they've underestimated how the American public is going to respond to that.
Well, at the moment, I don't think they have. I
Huh?
think we're far too tolerant of it.
No, I think, and I know you think this is the wrong approach, but I think there's this massive mentality massive mentality that we're just waiting for November 3rd.
But see, that's the.
And we're gonna make a statement at the polls.
But that's the narrative. The narrative they're trying to get us to accept is silence is violence.
Right.
We've got all these oppressed people, all these oppressed people groups, and nobody's saying or doing anything about it. And so
Yeah.
that mere silence about the issue, they're interpreting that as violence, therefore justifying in their minds to use violence in
They're
return.
saying they interpret it that way. It's pure pretense.
I understand that. So that's
I don't
so
have-
that's
so-
what I'm saying is that's where
And I guess
where we need to make
my
the
rebuttal to
distinction.
this is I don't have an intellectual or moral responsibility to unravel the insanity buried inside that. The moment they decide that they are somehow entitled to initiate force, to compel me or to compel anyone to a given outcome, and they forfeit any legitimacy.
I want to make, but I'm trying
Right.
to make the distinction here between what they're doing and what you're talking about, because clearly there comes a point where violence is appropriate. When it is in response to violence initiated by somebody else. So I guess what I'm saying is, how do we make the distinction between what you're suggesting and versus what we're seeing happening in these riots around the country?
Well, the distinction is there is actually there's no correlation, there's no moral equivalency between the two. So my ability, so I decided,
Right.
so I'm not saying, so there's a crucial distinction here. So I see the rioters in the streets over here and they walk down the street and destroy a car dealership and I get pissed off and say, I don't like the fact that they're protesting. So I walk down another street and destroy another car dealership in service to trying to demonstrate how much I don't like what they're doing. That's madness. Which is exactly the underlying premise here. What they're doing is madness. They don't get the right. There is no moral right to mass protest as it is being demonstrated right here, right now. There's no right to that. There is no logic that justifies it. The moment they stand across a thoroughfare and block free people from going about their business, they have initiated force. I don't care the reasons.
Well, first of all, you've got to have a permit to protest, and you're not allowed to be in the streets.
Okay.
You got to be on the sidewalks.
Would you?
So the first thing all of these cities do is relinquish that. If the cities take a stand from the very beginning and say, no, you got to have a permit and you can't be in the street, and if you're in the streets, we're going to clear the streets unless the permit says you're allowed to be in the streets. If they stop it there, you've got none of this.
What I hear you saying then is, if, and this isn't if, this is a hypothetical, if these people did have a legitimate right to use violence to, in other words, alleviate perceived violence being perpetrated against them, their violent response is at best misplaced.
It's just tyranny.
Because what they're doing is not directly against whoever is oppressing them. It's just merely, for lack of a better term, a child throwing a temper tantrum because they're not getting their way.
I know that's how we like to portray it, but I don't think that's really what's happening here. This isn't a temper tantrum. And I think it actually undermines our understanding of what our actions should be by failing to grasp. At worst, at best, they're feral children and should be put down. There is no such right to destroy for the sake of being heard. That doesn't exist.
Yes.
And that's not why they're doing it.
And and like you said, it's all pretense. All
Right.
that background is pretense.
They're telling us that's why they're doing it. And so,
That's their
Right.
logic to justify their actions, but in actual fact, it is no justification. There is no right to destroy in service to compelling me to listen. The fact of the matter is that just because you talk doesn't mean I have a moral obligation to listen and or agree with what you've said. And I always find it fascinating when I get into an argument and they'll say their piece and I'll offer a rebuttal and they'll go, no, you're not listening to me. No, I did listen and I disagreed.
Right. Yeah. This is a communist insurrection.
What we are seeing in the streets of the United States is a communist insurrection.
Right.
That is what we're seeing.
Okay. All right. So that's the distinction. And
Yes.
That's the distinction.
Well, the distinction between their violence and our violence is in response to no one has the right to destroy in the name of whatever just because they want to. We have the right to defend that and to use violence back to crush it,
Okay.
by definition.
Okay.
We must be willing to shed blood in service to tyranny, or in service to liberty, in service to freedom, and in service to justice. And history is filled with examples. People end up watering the firing line ditch with their blood, or they water the liberty tree with the blood of tyrants.
And I often wonder, I see pictures like that of people being marched to their death and they know they're going to get a bullet in the back of the head.
And they sit there
And they do
take
it willingly.
Well,
Why? It's like, look, I'm going to die anyway. Why not
Right.
go down? Why
Why
not
not
go
go down
down
fighting?
fighting?
right, and some of the videos, ISIS videos, where you've got 10 ISIS guys lining up 35, 40 people to shoot them all down, or, tell them to get down in a ditch. Wait a minute. If we all bum rush them,
We take some of them.
yeah,
And actually,
there's
maybe this
5
needs-
of us are gonna die, maybe 10.
Maybe this needs to be part of my action plan here, because
Yeah.
this business of us just hanging around and just waiting to get shot in the head is absurd.
Right.
If you're in a group and you very obviously outnumber that group, then you need to be, it has to be, it might be all of you that die, but you're going to die anyhow, so take 1 or 2 with you.
Right.
So, the bare minimum actions are, you must have your legislators, all of them on speed dial. All of them. At the federal level and at the local and state level. You must get these people on speed dial. And every time you hear a policy, some law that's being considered, you must be on there hot, like a hot mess all the time. You need to wear them out. Strategy 1, you must change your buying habits. I don't understand why the political right seems to struggle with this, while the political left relishes every time they bring a business to its knees. Businesses who insist on giving money to organizations that are seeking the destruction of America, as such, are committing slow suicide. But we must hasten that suicide and make it clear that if it is in the U.S., if you support any such organization, you will not remain in business. Demand that all businesses promote and advocate the very freedom that make their existence possible. Stop buying any Nike products or any products endorsed by the NFL, the NBA, or the MLB. These cesspools of social justice shall not continue to prosper in the country they revile. The best strategy is the leftist strategy. Isolate a single business, organize a boycott, and keep it going until the business gives up.
Well, I ate my last Chick-fil-A sandwich a couple months ago
Yeah.
when the president of Chick-fil-A got down in front of the wrapper and shined his shoes for him.
Well, I have never been all that enamored with Chick-fil-A, but I was appalled when I figured out they gave money to the Southern Poverty Law organization. Southern Poverty Law is as leftist and as Marxist as it gets. And they had to backpedal a little later, and they said, well, we give money to a lot of places. The fact that there was anybody on their board that thought that was some place to actually give money, I found unconscionable. We must dry up the economic pipeline that is feeding the Marxist beast. And as soon as a competitor shows up in the market with a competing product, move quickly to support that product. Now, I will say I do have a couple of challenges. I don't know what to do about Facebook and Google yet. because Facebook reaches so many people, it's hard to get off of Facebook, because if you have any hope of being able to reach into the public space, really right now, Facebook is the standalone.
Well, we don't really directly fund Facebook anyway. I mean, Facebook, for as far as users are concerned, is a free platform. They only make their revenue through ads.
I understand.
Through selling ads. So, you know.
But in some respects, people leaving Facebook would dramatically impact their business, their ability to sell those ads.
Right. But one of the things that I do, I mean, I hate using Facebook on the Facebook app on my phone because, number one, I don't like the layout, but number two, you get bombarded with ads. But whereas if I use it on my browser, I have an ad block. I not only have an ad blocking, I have an ad blocking feature on my browser, but I've also got an extension that lets me modify Facebook to see or to show or not show anything I want. So it customizes my Facebook layout. I don't get any advertising or direct marketing through Facebook when I'm on my browser. So that's
actually a pretty good strategy.
Yeah.
The other, I can't imagine people who use Facebook on their phone, because that gives Facebook, by definition, it's pumping all of your location, all of your information off of your phone.
There is even a browser extension for Facebook called Facebook Container, which basically puts your Facebook browser in a container, and it does not allow any outside links. It doesn't allow Facebook to track any other sites you go to, so that they can then in turn market to you. It doesn't give Facebook any mechanism to track any of your external clicks or browsing habits or anything like that.
Well, that'd be a good thing to know about, because my concern is less about the economics and more about the totalitarian power. Because I have every expectation that the moment the political left, if they ever actually seize power, one of the first things they're going to do is scour social media to figure out who their dissidents are.
Oh, sure.
Stop giving money to government universities. They are islands of totalitarianism, raising the generations of youth who will slit your throat in the name of the Marxist revolution. I heard Charlie Kirk talk about this, Turning Point USA. A kid, 18 years old, decides to take on universities and leftist politics in universities. Truly amazing story. And he pointed out that last year, I believe, or maybe it was 2018, whatever, whenever I saw it, the previous year, $44 billion had been given to universities in America. And that isn't taxation, that isn't subsidy money from the Fed. That is obscene, particularly considering that the people coming out of those universities are profoundly maleducated, have functionally, the vast percentage of them have no marketable skill, and they have been indoctrinated. They have been indoctrinated to the very ideas that are setting out to destroy America as such. A good number of the rioters that we're seeing in the streets are white college co-eds who spent 4 years of their life doing gender studies and are wonder why they can't find a job other than Starbucks to feed themselves. Stop giving them money. I think we must make a national push to defund universities across the board. The fact that these universities are taking our tax dollars, feeding it into professors who are teaching critical theory, is obscene. We must end this pipeline, and at the very least, stop giving to the universities. They are your enemies. We must stop subsidizing the organizations that are raising the generation that is going to kill us.
Now, these are private organizations. Why are they getting federal money to begin with?
That is a great question. The Constitution provides for education. And we've got to have education. If they're educated, we don't have indolence and we don't have people that are unemployable. Well, actually, no. Our universities are centers for unemployment.
Right.
I think accreditation is the is the big thing. But, you know, even private universities want to be accredited. So I think the desire for accreditation makes them makes them eligible for government assistance,
Yeah.
which in turn means you gotta basically be in homage to whatever the government tells you.
Strategy 3, speaking of schools, K through 12. They're just a little younger, but they're teaching them exactly the same thing.
Right.
You must get in the game impacting the school board and the local curriculum. Just because your kids are not in the school, you're still giving tax dollars. The obscene relationship between the fact that you have to keep giving tax dollars, you don't get to have school choice, and you must continue to subsidize these people. If you don't have children, you're homeschooling, get in the game and start hammering away at these local school districts.
So when we had Blaine in school across the street, first grade, they got their school supply list, okay? And I'm like, $5 of crayons? Blaine, what's he need 5 boxes of crayons for?
Oh yeah, it's a little collectivist club.
Yeah, and Susan goes, oh, well, basically, we're not buying just for Blaine. You're buying for all of the students in the class, and everybody contributes that, and it all goes into one supply cabinet. And I go, so in first grade, we're teaching collectivist principles,
Yes.
basically.
Yes. And we must work to end all government schools, their unionized monopolies,
Right.
and the distribution of tax dollars to organizations that advanced statist collectivist ideologies.
I mean, okay, welcome to public school. Oh, by the way, you've got to buy crayons for all the kids that aren't your kids. Okay? It's redistribution of crayons and pencils and
Can't
it's
you
insane.
share? Can't you share?
Yeah.
Are you just an evil, greedy capitalist? Tactic 4, the GOP is corrupt, nearly useless, unreliable, and weak. It must be pruned.
And I want to give a shout out now to anybody who's listening who lives in the state of Ohio. Call your state representative and strongly urge them to support the articles of impeachment against DeWine.
To prune this tree, you must demand that political leaders in the party advance the unequivocal defense of individualism and the corollary of individual freedom, capitalism. I don't know if I told you guys, I don't think I've told you guys online, I might have told the people here. So I moved to Denver a couple years ago, right around the time Donald Trump was elected. And I didn't know it then, but it turns out that Colorado, there has been a plan in place to turn Colorado blue for about 10 years, and they succeeded. Colorado used to be very conservative, Dr. James Dobson, focus on the family, gun-toting, Western, Denver, Colorado kind of thing. Paulus, can't think of his first name off the top of my head, but the governor's last name is Paulus. Jared Paulus? Sorry, I don't mean to butcher his first name, I just can't remember. Anyway, so he's, like a lot of Democrats, he's extraordinarily wealthy, and he got together with a bunch of other wealthy guys who are all leftists and decided to get a strategy to turn Denver blue. They succeeded. He got elected, and now there is unrestrained leftism within Denver. And so I was, after the election, now when I first got there, it had been about 3 months, and I was new to the space, so I didn't know who the Republican was and who the Democrat was. And when I would listen to the political advertisements, I couldn't tell the difference. There was I couldn't make the distinction just based on what I saw on television. Now eventually, I guess his name is Jared. Eventually I heard a policy advertisement and realized it was straight up democratic socialism. And that's when I realized that this guy was the socialist Democrat position in the state. And then I was mad. If you as a Republican candidate cannot distinguish yourself successfully from an avowed socialist you have no business being in the party. So I was downtown Denver, and I was doing some work down there, and I went to have lunch up by the Capitol, and I happened to be in this restaurant, and a guy from the state Capitol came in, and I looked him up on my phone and realized he was a Republican representative for the state of Colorado. And so I walked over to him, and there had been some recent legislation that had gone out, and I think the Republicans managed to kind of curtail it, to kind of make it sane as opposed to insane. And I walked over to him and said, thanks for fighting the good fight. Started the conversation, and he got chatty, and somehow or another he swerved into, he was talking about how they were having so much trouble in the state of Colorado, and the reason they were really having trouble in the state of Colorado was, well, it's the up-ticket issue. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, Donald Trump. And that's when my blood pressure spiked. And I told him, I said, are you serious? The reason you think you lost the election here in Denver is because Donald Trump tweets mean things? I said, that's not why you lost here. You lost it because the Republican Party is incompetent. If you cannot successfully distinguish yourself from a Democrat socialist 3 months before the election, successfully, if you can't openly defend capitalism to your constituency, you're incompetent.
Right.
This is the kind of conversation you must have with your representatives. This nonsensical notion that they get to sidestep their own incompetence and the party incompetence, and this nonsensical notion that they don't have the moral obligation to fight, to defend liberty. They were elected to do that. Anything less is unacceptable. Am I running too long here?
Nope.
If they cannot unequivocally and unapologetically defend capitalism against the current Democrat crop of Marxists, they are not fit to represent America. You must demand that candidates quit pandering for votes by being nice and tolerant, but rather level unapologetic criticisms of the Marxist organizations. There is no such thing as a compromise between a little bit of slavery and a little bit of freedom. Socialism, progressivism, Marxism are all synonyms for the same political poison. Enslavement of the people to the people in the name of the people. There is nothing more anti-American than this. Any interest in compromise is evidence of Republican weakness, and it must be pruned with ruthless determination. Strategy 5, losing an election is not a consequence. Losing an election for a career politician is a detour on their reemergence in a later election cycle.
Right.
Republicans must become ruthless in their determination to impeach, investigate, and remove political leaders from their offices. The fact that DeWine has been able to run roughshod over the Ohio Constitution is unconscionable.
Right.
Often the weakness of career politicians is directly tied to their corruption. We must put criminals in jail. We must demand the prosecution of treason for our political leaders. If your state constitution does not provide a mechanism for removing a corrupt or tyrannical government, a governor who can turn over unrestrained power to a bureaucrat, then you do not have a constitution. You have a polite suggestion. If there is no legal consequence for failing to abide by the Constitution of your state, you don't have an agreement with anybody. They can run roughshod over you at any point.
I think the Ohio Constitution, with regards to impeachment, I think it states that if any political, anybody in political office is impeached, that actually disqualifies them for any office position anywhere within the state for life.
Good. If the politicians will not abide by the constitutions, the civil agreements, and this is crucial, the reason it is called civil liberties, it's not because it's the privileges the government gives us. It is a civil liberty that we the people granted to the government, and we're civil because they abide by it. If they fail to abide by it, we need to quit being civil. If the last 6 months has shown anything to America, it is that the political powers only respect one thing: violence. The political right needs to give them something to respect. So, honestly, about this time in my prep last night, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I ran out of intellectual energy. There's a lot more to develop in this action plan, a lot, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much more needs to be done. I woke up this morning, I don't even remember when, but the first two things that popped into my head was, oh, there's also needs to be, we need to have this, and we need to have this. So I thought I'd go ahead and actually talk about this. Law enforcement that fails to abide by the Constitution and seizes weapons from law-abiding citizens because they quote-unquote have orders, while standing idly by as rioters and looters maraud across the city, must end. And probably one of the greatest examples of this currently is the McCluskeys in St. Louis. They step out to defend their property, and the police are sent as a weapon of political action to take their weapons. Now, I watched the man, was his name Robert, whoever the man is, I don't remember, the husband. He was on, was it Tucker Carlson or whatever, and he was very, very, very apologetic, and like, you know, we don't think anything's bad about these police officers, and they're just have a tough job to do. And I'm screaming at the television, no. I don't care that they have a tough job. That's what they signed up for. They don't get to have it both ways. Right. They don't get to have us defend their existence and then turn around and totally ignore their oath of office. Right. Their first and foremost obligation is to defend and protect the Constitution. And if a political power is telling them to go seize weapons from somebody who has done nothing wrong, and they do, they are criminals.
Well, we don't know how many policemen on that force refused to go out and do it.
I don't care how many did.
Yeah, some did.
Some did, and they didn't arrest their fellow cops for violating the Constitution.
Right.
You don't get to have it both ways here, law enforcement. You want us to be on your side, then you must defend and protect the Constitution. If you're unwilling to do that, what you're really telling me is that you're nothing more than a mercenary paid by the highest bidder. And as long as some political power somewhere will keep paying your paycheck, you'll do what they say. Yeah. You standing by, idly by, while riots happen, and then turning your law enforcement powers on people trying to defend themselves is unconscionable. Law enforcement does not get its authority from the state. They get it from the people. They are not hired henchmen of mayors and governors. Number 2, voting. We have a representative republic. And we do vote to choose various levels of our political leaders. But there's a sentiment going around that we will, quote, lose America after this election, meaning we will have to accept the vote because America voted for socialism. And my answer here is unequivocally no. There is no moral or constitutional obligation for such a thing. First, we do not have a democracy. Democracy is mob rule, and we have no moral obligation to subject ourselves to that mob rule. Ben Franklin said once, democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting what they're going to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. I think that's a good statement, but I think the American version ought to be this. Democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for dinner. Liberty is a well-armed eagle savaging the tyrannical mob. Second, the state does not have the right to enslave. This was the real root issue behind our American Revolution. Does the state have the right States' rights. That's what they kept saying it was about. But the root question was, does the state have the right to enslave? The answer to that is unequivocally no. The state does not have the right to enslave. And that also means that even by popular vote, the state does not have the right to enslave. Never forget the progression. The constituent part of all groups are individuals. Individuals join into social contract to protect themselves in service to their life, liberty, and the pursuit of their happiness and property. Governments exist only because the individuals, the people, decided to give them the monopoly of force in that defense. Just because we elected people to do that doesn't mean they get to turn around and deliver the people into the hands of tyranny.
No.
That is morally corrupt. We do not have the moral obligation to accept a vote that delivers us into slavery. Period. All political structures that are enacted independent of the consent of the government are not legitimate forms of the American government, and they must be abolished. The only legitimate government is one that protects the individual in their pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. This is America. This is the American ideal. You only lose this ideal, you only lose this if you capitulate when the tyranny comes. So much more here needs to be laid out. It's too many ideas for me to actually put into organized for consumption. So I'm going to stop here. But just in case you haven't gotten the gravity of what comes next, if you do not fight, this is currently what's on the table in the current progressive Marxist tribal revolution. White men are racists, white culture is corrupt, white success is a byproduct of their privilege, racism is a public health crisis, therefore white people need to be compelled to right action. We've watched over the last 6 months what political forces will do with the concept of quote-unquote public health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
They have all but stripped us of all of our constitutional protections. And white people need to sacrifice and pay reparations for their sin of racism. The last time a political movement was based on the villainization of one tribe, well, we already know what that movie looks like. Thank you.